The sun had barely risen when the Carter family pulled into the airport parking garage. It was a long-awaited day after months of planning and saving. They were finally headed to Florida for a beach vacation. 10-year-old Mason was practically bouncing with excitement. He wore a baseball cap, a cartoon t-shirt, and carried his favorite item in the whole world, his small blue backpack, decorated with patches from every place he had visited. It was never far from his side, not at school, not at home, and certainly not on an adventure like this. Inside the airport, the mood was joyful. Travelers rushed from counter to counter. Announcements echoed overhead. Kids clutched stuffed toys while parents tried to keep the group together. The Carters checked in their luggage and walked toward the security checkpoint. Mason's father, David, guided them forward, tickets and passports in hand, while his mother, Lauren, reminded Mason not to wander off. Just as they reached the beginning of the security line, a pair of officers appeared, walking with a large German shepherd. The dog was calm but alert, its ears perked and eyes sharp. This was Rex, one of the airport's most reliable K9 units. He had been trained to detect a wide range of substances, everything from drugs and explosives to chemical residues. Mason glanced at the dog as they passed. "Cool dog," he whispered to his mom. But within seconds, that cool dog stopped walking. Rex's nose twitched, and then he jolted to the side, barking loudly. The sudden noise startled everyone. People turned. Travelers froze in line. The Carter family looked around, confused. Rex lunged toward Mason's backpack, barking furiously. His handler, Officer Delgado, quickly tightened his grip on the leash, holding Rex back with both hands. But Rex wasn't calming down. He paced wildly, pulling toward Mason, his barks becoming sharper and louder with each second. "Please step aside," one officer said to the Carters, his tone serious but calm. "What's going on?" David asked, looking from the officers to his son. "It's just a kid's backpack. We need to examine it," Officer Delgado said. "The dog has picked up a strong scent." Mason shrank back slightly. "It's just my stuff," he said quietly, still clutching the backpack. "There's nothing bad in there." Lauren crouched beside him. "Sweetheart, it's okay. Just let them check, all right?" Other passengers were moved back. A TSA supervisor was called. Security officers began forming a perimeter around the area. Though the atmosphere remained calm, a quiet tension had filled the terminal. Everyone could feel that something serious was unfolding. Officer Delgado tried to reassure the family. "Rex is well-trained. He doesn't bark unless he smells something that isn't supposed to be here. It could be a mistake, but we have to check." Mason slowly handed over his bag. His eyes darted nervously from the dog to the officers. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said again. "We know," Lauren replied softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. The backpack was taken to a nearby inspection table while the Carters were politely asked to wait. Off to the side, Rex, meanwhile, sat beside his handler, still on high alert, but no longer barking. His eyes were locked on the bag. All around them, passengers whispered and watched. Phones were discreetly raised to capture the scene. Some thought it might be a drill. Others feared it was something much worse. No one knew what was inside the backpack yet. But Rex did. And whatever he smelled, it was serious enough to stop an entire security checkpoint cold. Officer Delgado stood tall beside Rex, one hand gripping the leash tightly. His eyes followed the backpack as it was placed gently onto the inspection table. Though years of training had taught him to stay calm in tense situations, he felt a tightness in his chest. Rex wasn't just any security dog, he was the department's most dependable K9. And his track record was flawless. Every time he had raised an alert in the past, there had been a reason, and judging by Rex's earlier reaction, this was no false alarm. Across the checkpoint, Lauren Carter tried to soothe Mason, who now looked like he was on the verge of tears. His father knelt beside him, whispering, "It's okay, buddy. No one thinks you did anything wrong. They're just making sure everything's safe." Mason nodded, but his small hands were trembling. He kept glancing at the inspection table, where a pair of TSA agents were now donning gloves and preparing to open the bag. One officer was filming the process on a body camera, while another carefully began unzipping the front compartments. "I don't understand," Lauren said quietly to a nearby officer. "There's nothing dangerous in that bag. We packed it ourselves." The officer offered a polite but firm reply. "Ma'am, sometimes even harmless-looking items can raise alerts. The dog is trained to detect traces of certain materials, even small ones." Mason overheard the word materials and looked up. "But I only brought stuff from home. And my book. And my dinosaur." His voice trailed off. Rex, though now sitting, remained completely focused. His ears were locked forward, his muscles tense. He watched every movement as the inspection team slowly began pulling items from the bag. A worn-out sketchbook, a pencil case, a folded-up beach towel, a children's mystery novel, and a stuffed green dinosaur with one eye missing. So far, nothing unusual. Then came the tablet, half-charged, still playing Mason's favorite cartoon theme music. The TSA agents set it aside. They carefully unzipped a smaller hidden compartment at the bottom of the backpack. And that's when they found it, wrapped tightly in a gray, faded piece of cloth with something solid, metallic, cylindrical in shape. The agent paused and gave Officer Delgado a quick glance. "Here," the agent said, his voice more serious now. He lifted the item slowly and placed it on a steel tray. The cloth was unwrapped gently. There it was, an old, rusted, but perfectly intact cylindrical object. The surface was covered in grime and strange markings, etched letters and numbers that no longer made sense. There were no buttons or wires, nothing blinking or buzzing. But it didn't look like something that belonged in a child's backpack. Rex stood up again, letting out a low, sharp bark. Delgado took a step closer and radioed. In a code, "Possible ordnance call on the bomb squad. Immediate secure protocol." At that moment, the supervisor turned to the Carters. "Please come with me," he said calmly but firmly. "We need to move you to a secure area." "This is just a precaution." Lauren's mouth opened slightly. "Wait, what? Is that thing? Is it dangerous?" Mason's eyes widened as he saw the officers staring at the object. He looked down, then back up. "It's just Grandpa's can," he said quietly. "He gave it to me to bring for show and tell." That sentence stopped everyone in their tracks. Officer Delgado turned toward the boy. "Your grandfather gave this to you?" Mason nodded. "From his attic. He said it was from when he was a soldier." That was enough to cause a shift in understanding, but not enough to lift the alert. If this object was military, and possibly old ordnance, even a harmless one, it had no place in an airport, and it definitely explained why Rex had reacted so strongly. Still, more questions remained. What exactly was the object? Why did Mason have it? And could it still be dangerous, even after all these years? In the sterile waiting room just past the main terminal, the Carter family sat in silence. The room was brightly lit, but strangely cold. Two uniformed TSA officers stood by the door, occasionally whispering to each other. Mason clutched his stuffed dinosaur tightly, his eyes darting around the unfamiliar space. The words he had just spoken, "Grandpa gave it to me," echoed in everyone's mind. Officer Delgado entered, followed closely by a security supervisor. Both had serious, but calm expressions. They sat down across from the family, hands resting on their knees, notepads at the ready. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," Delgado began, "your son said the object came from his grandfather. Can you confirm that?" David gave a nervous nod. "We were visiting him last weekend. Mason was in the attic looking through old things. I didn't think he actually brought anything back. I didn't tell anyone," Mason added quickly. "He let me have it. He said it was a smoke thing from when he was in the war. Not a bomb or anything, just a souvenir." Lauren looked shocked. "Mason, why didn't you tell us?" "I didn't think it was a big deal," Mason said, shrinking in his chair. "Grandpa said it didn't work anymore." Officer Delgado nodded. "We understand, Mason, and you're not in trouble. But the item you packed is a World War II-era military canister. It still had chemical residue inside. Our dog picked up the scent immediately." David ran his hand down his face. "So it was dangerous?" "Not active," the supervisor clarified, "but it was enough to trigger our systems." Anything that looks like military ordnance, even a historic item, has to be treated seriously. There was a moment of silence. Mason looked down. I just wanted to show it to my class, for show and tell. I thought it was cool. Grandpa said it was from a time he never talks about. He finally told me stories and said I was the only one who cared. Lauren's face softened. Oh, honey, Delgado exchanged a glance with the supervisor. The situation had become clear. There was no intent to break rules, no smuggling, and certainly no malicious plan. Just an innocent boy, a misunderstood keepsake, and a deeply emotional connection to a grandfather's forgotten past. But the reality remained. Protocol had been broken. Unfortunately, the supervisor said gently, "We can't allow you to travel with the canister. It's being secured by our hazardous materials team and will be transferred to the proper authorities." Mason nodded quietly. He didn't protest. He just stared down at his dinosaur. "You're not in any legal trouble," Delgado added, "but we do need to file an official report. It will document the item, its origin, and your cooperation. After that, we'll work to get you rebooked on a later flight." David sighed with relief. "Thank you for handling this so calmly. I know it could have gone very differently. It's our job," Delgado replied. And frankly, Mason handled himself better than most adults do in situations like this. For the first time in an hour, Mason smiled just a little. Still, questions lingered in the minds of the officers. What other items might be hiding in attics across the country, forgotten and dusty, but capable of setting off modern alarms? This time, it was a smoke canister in the hands of a child. Next time, it might not be so harmless. Back in the terminal, passengers were slowly allowed to resume boarding. Most never found out exactly what had caused the delay, only that a child's backpack had frozen the checkpoint in place. Rumors spread, some exaggerated, some wildly wrong, but none close to the real truth. Inside that bag wasn't danger. It was memory. And a story that hadn't been told in over 70 years. Back at the inspection table, the atmosphere remained quiet, but tense. The old canister sat in a sealed evidence container, guarded by 2 officers while they waited for the bomb squad to arrive. Although the item was no longer considered an active threat, protocol required a full analysis. The smallest trace of chemical residue was enough to shut down an entire section of the airport, and even the faintest sign of instability had to be taken seriously. Meanwhile, Officer Delgado stood to the side, replaying the conversation he had just had with Mason. The boy's words stayed with him, especially the part about how his grandfather never talked about the war until that day. Delgado had heard similar stories from veterans before. Items like this canister didn't just carry dust and rust, they carried memories, sometimes heavy ones. The bomb squad finally arrived, wheeling in a set of equipment cases and dressed in protective gear. They approached the table with practiced precision, examining the item without touching it directly at first, using a portable scanner. One of the technicians identified the markings. On the side of the cylinder, a long serial number, a barely visible U.S. military stamp, and faded handwriting, almost invisible, marked in black ink. Smoke, 1944, Europe. One of the technicians looked up. "It's legit. Probably used for signaling or covered during movement. Could have been part of a battlefield supply drop." Another technician leaned in closer. "There's corrosion on the seal, but no sign of pressurization. It's safe, well, safe now." Still, the object was placed in a lead-lined container and would be taken to a military collection unit for proper decommissioning. They'd seen old grenades, rusted mines, even full artillery shells show up in luggage before. But this case stood out for the age of the item, and because it came from a child's backpack, not an antique dealer's shipment. Officer Delgado approached one of the bomb techs after the assessment. "So he really just picked this up out of an attic?" "Looks like it," the technician replied. "I've seen stuff like this before. Families find old trunks, don't know what's inside, and assume it's harmless. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not." Back in the secure room, the Carters sat as a female officer returned with an update. She smiled reassuringly. "You're all set. We'll have your flight rebooked in an hour or two. You just need to sign a statement and confirm the details." Mason looked up. "What's going to happen to the canister?" "It'll be sent to a special military team," she replied. "They take care of historical items like this. It'll be safe. But I can't get it back." She shook her head gently. "I'm sorry. It's not allowed on planes even as a keepsake." Mason nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. David placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, buddy. We'll talk to Grandpa when we get back. Maybe he has other stories. Ones we can bring without setting off alarms." Lauren gave a soft chuckle. The first real laugh of the day. Next time, we packed the bag together. The moment of lightness lifted the room. Just then, Officer Delgado walked in with Rex, who wagged his tail slowly as he saw Mason again. Delgado crouched next to the boy. "Hey, champ. I wanted to tell you something." Mason looked up. "You did the right thing by telling us where it came from. You didn't hide anything. That takes courage." Mason smiled shyly. "Rex is a really good dog." Delgado gave Rex a pat on the head. "The best partner I've ever had." The entire Carter family stood to leave. They had a flight to catch. And now, a story they'd never forget. Mason didn't bring home the canister, but he carried something else with him now. A deeper connection to his grandfather's past, and a lesson in how even old history can surprise the present. As the bomb squad secured the canister and cleared the inspection area, airport staff slowly reopened the security line. Travelers who had been watching from afar were now able to move again. Though many remained curious about what had happened, whispers filled the air. Some guessed it was a weapon, others assumed it was a hoax or a drill. The truth, however, was something much more personal and unexpected. Inside the secure room, the Carters were given bottled water and an apology for the delay. Though the tension had eased, everyone still felt a bit shaken. Mason sat quietly between his parents, his fingers lightly tracing the seams of his stuffed dinosaur's ear. His eyes were fixed on the floor. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Lauren asked softly. Mason nodded, but his voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to scare anyone. I thought it would be okay." David leaned closer. "We know. No one thinks you did anything wrong. You were just excited to bring something from Grandpa. We get it." Mason looked up. "He told me that Ken was the last thing he kept from the war." He said it reminded him of a moment he never forgot. Lauren exchanged a glance with David. They had both known her father was a veteran, but he rarely spoke about his time in the service. He had always been a quiet man, full of wisdom, but cautious with words, especially about the past. Until now, neither of them knew he had kept a military item at all, let alone one with lingering chemical traces. Just then, Officer Delgado returned. This time, he wasn't alone. He carried a printed report in one hand and a small clear evidence bag in the other. Inside the bag was the gray cloth that had been used to wrap the canister. "I thought you might want to keep this," he said, offering the bag to Mason. "There's nothing dangerous about the cloth. It's old, but safe. We figured it might mean something to you." Mason's eyes lit up. He reached for the bag, holding it gently like it was made of glass. "Thank you," he said quietly. Delgado handed the report to David. "This is for your records. It confirms the item was a diffused World War II smoke canister. It was never rearmed, but due to residue and appearance, it triggered all the usual protocols." David glanced through the paper, nodding slowly. "This could have gone very differently, couldn't it?" Delgado's expression turned thoughtful. "It could have, but it didn't." Mason was honest. "You all cooperated. That makes a difference." He paused for a moment, then added, "We see a lot of stressful situations here, some serious, some not. But this was different. It was personal." Mason looked up at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think my grandpa was scared when he used that can?" Delgado sat down, lowering himself to Mason's level. "I think your grandpa probably went through things most of us can't imagine. And maybe that canister reminded him of something he survived, something that mattered. Sometimes the scariest things aren't the things we carry in our hands, but the things we carry in our hearts." Mason nodded slowly, as if absorbing the weight of those words. Outside, the announcement for the rebooked flight finally came through. Flight 487 to Orlando, now boarding at Gate 17. Lauren stood and reached for her bag. David gently pulled Mason to his feet. "Time to go," he said with a soft smile. As they exited the room, Mason held the clear evidence bag close to his chest. The gray cloth inside seemed so ordinary, just a piece of fabric. But to him it was more than that. It was a thread to the past, a piece of a story long buried, now brought back to life by the nose of a dog and the heart of a child. 3 days later, back home from Florida, Mason sat cross-legged on the living room rug, flipping through an old photo album. The beach trip had been fun, sunny days, warm sand, and ocean waves, but Mason couldn't stop thinking about the canister. Every time he closed his eyes, he pictured the faded writing, the rusted metal, the cloth it had been wrapped in. He kept the clear evidence bag on his nightstand like a piece of treasure. His parents had told Grandpa William what happened. At first, he had gone quiet. Then he'd simply nodded and said, "Guess it was time." Now they were visiting him at his small countryside home. Mason had the evidence bag clutched in one hand and a bundle of curiosity swirling in his chest. After dinner, while the adults cleared the table, Mason walked into the den where his grandfather sat in his old recliner, a cup of tea in hand. "I brought this back," Mason said, holding up the bag. Grandpa William looked at the cloth inside, his expression unreadable. "You remember it, right?" Mason asked. The old man nodded slowly. "I do, more than I'd like to admit." "Why'd you keep it?" Mason's voice was quiet. "You said it was just smoke, not a weapon." Grandpa looked down into his tea. For a while, the room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Then he spoke. "That canister was part of my first mission," he said. "We were in Europe, winter, cold. My unit was under heavy fire. We couldn't see anything. One of the guys tossed a smoke can to signal retreat. It gave us enough cover to escape through a broken fence." He paused, eyes distant. "We lost 2 men that day, but 5 of us made it because of that smoke." Mason listened carefully, holding onto every word. "I picked it up after we got out," Grandpa continued. "It was dented, rusted already, but to me, it meant survival. I kept it in my locker, then in my attic. Never thought anyone would care about it again." "I cared," Mason said softly. "I thought it was amazing." Grandpa gave a small smile. "I can see that. I just wish I had told you the story before you packed it in your bag." "I didn't mean to cause trouble," Mason added quickly. "I just wanted to bring something special to school, something that mattered." "It did matter," Grandpa said, leaning forward, "and you reminded me of that. I spent years forgetting those days, trying to push them into the attic like old furniture. But you brought it back with curiosity instead of fear." They sat in silence again. 2 generations connected by a relic of war and the quiet strength of remembrance. After a few minutes, Grandpa stood and walked over to a nearby cabinet. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thin wooden box. It was lined with old pins, a faded photo, and a folded letter. "This," he said, "is something else I kept. Never showed it to anyone, not even your mom." Mason leaned in. "It's my discharge paper, and a letter from a soldier who didn't make it. He wrote it 2 days before we lost him. I've never read it aloud, but I think maybe we can read it together." Mason's eyes widened. "Really?" Grandpa nodded. "You were in that, Mason, in that quiet room. History no longer felt distant. It lived, breathed, and whispered through old paper and honest conversation. A boy who had once packed a mysterious canister in his backpack was now helping his grandfather unpack memories sealed away for decades. And this time, there were no alarms, only understanding. 2 weeks later, the Carter family returned to the airport, not for a trip this time, but for something Mason had asked for himself. With his parents' help, he had written a letter to the TSA, thanking the officers and, most importantly, Rex, the security dog. Mason had asked if he could visit and personally say thank you. To his surprise, the agency responded with an invitation. When they arrived, Officer Delgado was waiting for them just outside the security area. Rex sat beside him, calm as ever, his intelligent eyes alert and friendly. "Look who's back," Delgado said with a smile, kneeling down beside the boy. "We've been talking about you around here." You caused quite a stir, but in a good way. Mason chuckled nervously. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to say thanks to you and to Rex. Delgado nodded. We're glad you're here. Rex remembers you, don't you, boy? Rex gave a soft bark and nudged Mason's hand with his nose. Mason reached into his backpack, a different one this time, bright red with no hidden compartments, and pulled out a carefully folded paper. I wrote this for school. It's my report for show and tell. I wanted to give you a copy. Delgado accepted the paper and scanned the title, The Day a Dog Saved My Backpack, and My Grandpa's Story. He smiled. That's quite a title. I told them everything, Mason said proudly. How Rex helped find something that wasn't dangerous, but really important, and how it made Grandpa talk about the war for the first time. Delgado's eyes softened. That's powerful, Mason. You turned a security scare into a story that meant something. Mason blushed and looked down. Grandpa gave me something else. A letter from one of his friends who didn't make it. We read it together. It was kind of sad, but also nice. Delgado placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Sometimes stories like that don't get told until someone like you comes along. Lauren and David stood to the side, watching with quiet pride, seeing their son connect with the officer, and the dog who had once caused such a panic reminded them how quickly fear can turn to meaning when people take time to listen. Just then, a few other TSA staff members joined them. One carried a small plaque with a certificate attached. This, Delgado said, turning toward the family, is something we don't usually do, but we thought it was only right. He handed the plaque to Mason. On it was a photo of Rex in uniform, the TSA logo, and the words, in recognition of curiosity, honesty, and courage, presented to Mason Carter for reminding us that sometimes even the smallest passenger can carry the biggest story. Mason's jaw dropped. For me, you earned it, Delgado said. Not just for how you handled everything, but because you reminded us that every item tells a story. And sometimes the most important discoveries come from the people we least expect. Rex barked again, gently wagging his tail. I think he agrees, Delgado added. As they posed for a photo, Mason stood tall, holding the plaque in one hand and gently scratching Rex's head with the other. Passengers walking by smiled at the sight, most unaware of the full story behind the moment. Before leaving, Mason turned to Delgado and said, I want to work with dogs like Rex one day. Delgado smiled. I think you'd be great at it. Just promise me one thing. What? No more antique war gear in your carry-on. Mason laughed. Deal. They walked out of the terminal that day with something better than a souvenir. They had closure. They had connection. And for Mason, it wasn't just the day a dog barked at his backpack. It was the day history came to life and taught him something no textbook ever could. A week after the visit to the airport, the story of Mason and the barking security dog made its way into the local news. Then, unexpectedly, it was picked up by a national news outlet. A reporter had reached out to the Carter family after reading Mason's school essay, and within days, a short video segment aired with the title, Boys, Backpack Stops Airport. What a Security Dog Found sparked a hidden family story. The piece featured clips of Mason receiving his plaque, a brief interview with Officer Delgado, and footage of Rex trotting proudly beside his handler. The reaction was overwhelming. Viewers from across the country left comments, some praising the boy's honesty, others sharing how a forgotten item in their own family had once held powerful meaning. Veterans wrote in to thank Mason for reminding the world that the objects of war are not always weapons, they are memories, frozen in metal and cloth. In school, Mason was treated like a local hero. His teacher read his essay aloud to the class, and the principal printed copies for a school-wide bulletin board. His classmates, who had once only seen him as the quiet boy who loved dinosaurs and doodling, now saw him differently. They saw him as someone brave enough to ask questions adults had ignored. But the person most changed by the experience was Mason himself. He no longer looked at old things the same way. Where others saw rust and dust, he now saw stories. At home, he started asking questions about photo albums, letters, old pins, and medals in his grandfather's drawer. And his grandfather, now more open than ever before, answered every one of them. They began meeting every Saturday after lunch. Sometimes they'd talk, Sometimes they'd just sit. One afternoon, Grandpa William handed Mason a small box. Inside was a compass, scratched and worn, but still working. "I carried this every day," he said. "When we got lost, it helped me find my way back." Mason's eyes widened. "Can I hold it?" "It's yours now," Grandpa said. "But not just to keep, to remember." Mason held it gently, understanding that this wasn't just a gift. It was a torch being passed, a reminder that real stories live on when someone cares enough to carry them forward. At the same time, Officer Delgado and Rex received their own recognition. The TSA commended them both for their sharp response and compassionate handling of a delicate situation. But when Delgado was asked by a local news anchor what he remembered most from that day, his answer wasn't about the canister. It wasn't the item, he said. It was the kid. "I've never seen someone his age handle something so serious with that much honesty and heart. He reminded me why we do this job, not just to stop threats, but to protect stories like his." As for Rex, he became something of a legend. People passing through the airport began asking, "Is this the dog from the backpack story?" Travelers would stop to take photos or offer treats, but Rex, ever professional, stayed focused on his job, alert, watchful, and always one step ahead. And somewhere in a classroom, a young boy sat at his desk, working on a new story for his school's writing contest. The title scribbled at the top read, "The day a barking dog found more than danger, he found a piece of the past." Mason didn't win first place that time, but it didn't matter. He had already found something more valuable than any prize. He had found connection, courage, and a sense of purpose, all because a security dog had trusted his instincts and refused to let a child's backpack pass without a second look.